want to welcome everybody here, and I want to introduce our special guest. Burke Allen grew up in Stallings, attended Logan High School, graduated as vice president of Logan High class of 1985. He began his broadcasting career in Logan, WLOG and WVW, and he later went on to on-air and management positions in Huntington, Charleston, Roanoke, Savannah, Las Vegas, Orlando, and Washington, D.C. for companies like CBS, Infinity, AM/FM, and Bonneville Broadcasting. He now heads up Allen Media Strategies. It's a full-service media, marketing, and public relations consulting company. His clients include best-selling authors, Hollywood screenwriters, entertainers, and speakers, including fellow West Virginians Homer Hickam of October Sky fame and the Denver Foundation, which is headed by Dreama Denver, who is the wife of Gilligan star Bob Denver. Burke maintains his Mountain State ties through ownership of 2 radio stations in West Virginia, WMOV in Ravenswood, Ripley, and WRLB in Lewisburg. He lives in Northern Virginia, just outside the Beltway of D.C., with his wife Christy and his children. And on a personal note, I can tell you that the next time anybody makes a comment about anything that I have said that possibly could be slightly inappropriate or just downright corny on the air, Burke is who got me into radio, so you can blame him. It's all his fault. Burke Allen.
It's always great to come back to Logan and to come home, and thank you guys for coming out today. Dave teased me a little bit. He said that he was probably going to, heckle me at lunch and be belligerent, and I said, why should today be any different than any other day, Dave? I was asked you to come and speak with you today because the Rotary International is involved with polio eradication, and many of you may remember my mom, Pat Adkins, who was the City of Logan police clerk for almost 30 years. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about what her life was like as a polio sufferer and a survivor, ultimately. She was born here in Logan during the Great Depression, 1934, in a January cold winter day to, like many of us, a coal miner father and a hardworking mom. And I will tell you, by the way, as a guy who's been a broadcaster for 25 years and a public speaker for almost as long, this will probably be a little tougher speech than I normally give, because as I think about her story, it's pretty inspirational. At 5 months of age, during the Great Depression, she was stricken with polio as a baby. And, that's every parent's worst nightmare, and especially during that time in the midst of the run-up to World War II. Now, my mom was a fighter even at that age, I'm told, and she spent an awful lot of her childhood actually not confined to a wheelchair, but instead confined to a full body cast. As a matter of fact, education was so important to her parents that they wanted her to learn how to read and to write despite her handicap. Now, at that time, in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, it was very unusual for a woman, much less a handicapped woman, to receive an education. However, that was a huge thing for her parents, and my mom actually learned how to read at age of 6 in a full body cast from the neck down, which is a pretty amazing thing. Now, she continued to go on to graduate with her class on time from Logan High School with the aid of homeschooling, and never gave up. She just did it. And as I found out after she passed away, because my mom was not one to talk about this sort of thing, this was a huge national media story. And so it sort of predated my career in the media. I found several articles in national newspapers and magazines from the spring of 1952 about Mom graduating from Logan High School as the first public school student in the state of West Virginia to do so. So it certainly made me proud. Her childhood was spent in and out of hospitals. She had to go to Huntington for an awful lot of painful surgeries, because back in this time, prior to the Salk vaccine for polio, doctors were flailing away. They were just trying to get their handle on this scourge that was sweeping across America. So there was a lot of what ultimately was unsuccessful, very painful surgery that she endured, that ultimately took her from being a little girl in leg braces to a little girl who was never able to walk again. But that didn't stop her. My mom, through education and tenacity, was able throughout her youth to go on and graduate on schedule from Logan High School. And as I told you, it was only after her passing that I realized that these newspaper articles actually inspired dozens of other young handicapped children around America. And we found this stack of yellowed letters, thanking her for inspiring them to go on and get an education. You see, at that time, most handicapped folks were sort of shut away. They were kept in a back room. They were kept out of the public spotlight. There was no Americans with Disabilities Act at that time. There were no wheelchair ramps. And things as simple as, a few stairs would keep you from being able to do anything. But my mom did it. And as I look around at some faces, and especially some faces under a little bit of white hair, I know some of you may remember my mom and remember that she was the type of lady that just went on and did it. Now, one might assume that leaving childhood and becoming a young adult confined to a wheelchair, that my mom, whose name was Pat, that her adult life would be heavily influenced by this battle with polio. And I want to thank Rotary International for doing everything they can to eradicate polio nationwide, and for the governor's office to declare this polio eradication week. Well, you'd be wrong about that shutting down my mom. An adulthood marked by the hard times of learning to live with the ravages of this terrible disease, polio, being sentenced to a lifetime confinement. Now imagine that, and that's what it is, a lifetime confinement to a wheelchair. Can't go to school with your friends. The old Logan High School on East End had lots of stairs, so lots of homeschooling. Unable to go anywhere that had more than 2 steps. Now imagine that. You're dependent on everyone else to do simple things. You want to go out to dinner, you got to ask for help. You want to go to a movie, you want to go shopping, eat in a restaurant, you want to go on a vacation. That's an issue. All of these things we take for granted are an issue. But that would be looking at things from the perspective of those of us who are up on our feet, someone who didn't know Pat Adkins. Now, as many people here in our town came to know, it certainly was not looking at life from Pat's point of view. You see, she was a person who I came to realize as a young adult was guided by 3 things: hope, love, and faith. And as a result of that, she had an entirely different perspective on life and how she would spend her time on this earth. And she, like so many others that we read about who are faced with adversity, decided not to take a back seat to her faith. And she persevered. Now, she didn't write what I'm going to read to you, but I'm sure you'll agree when you hear it, she certainly lived her life this way. This is a quote from Helen Keller, who was a deaf and blind woman who became a role model for millions of people in the early 1900s. And in a letter, Helen Keller wrote, "Security is mostly a superstition. It does not exist in nature, nor do the children of men as a whole experience it. Avoiding danger is not safer in the long run than outright exposure to it. For you see, life is either a daring adventure or it's nothing at all. To keep our faces toward change and to behave like free spirits in the presence of fate is strength undefeatable." And strength undefeatable really is what my mom and her fight with polio for her whole life was all about. Now, let me give you a couple of examples. We talked about hope and faith. Guided by hope, Pat wanted to graduate from high school with her buddies, and she did. Now, we may take it for granted today that graduating from high school is not a big deal. It's pretty unheard of in the 1940s and 50s for a handicapped child to be able to do that. But with a combination of homeschooling, being carried up flights of stairs by her teachers and classmates, and mostly by a sheer will to succeed, she was wheeled across that stage as a graduate of Logan High School in 1952. Guided by hope, she wanted the freedom of living life on her own terms, unbeatable by polio. And she appreciated my grandparents, Jesse and Brookie Maynard Pack, and her brother and sister for wanting to take care of her, but she wanted the freedom to experience her own life on her terms. She wanted to be able to come and go on her schedule. Despite polio, Pat wanted to go see things that were important to her. She wanted to behave, if you will, like the free spirit mentioned in Helen Keller's essay. Now, she realized in order to achieve that goal here in the mountains of southern West Virginia, she needed an extension of her legs that could get her where her legs couldn't get her. She needed to learn how to drive a car. With the aid of hand controls, she did learn how to drive a car and live independently. She wanted to continue her education after high school, and again, very unusual for a woman in that era, the early 50s, to go on to college, much less a woman in a wheelchair. Her parents were scared to death. But she did it. She went away to West Virginia State College, roomed with another young lady in a wheelchair who became the maid of honor at her wedding, and graduated with a clerical degree. Guided by hope, she wanted all the responsibilities and joys of being a wife. Now, her mother, my grandmother, in good faith, told her this would be a very difficult goal to achieve. However, guided by hope, while a young woman, Pat, met my dad, Stanley Adkins, himself, by the way, confined to a wheelchair due to an automobile accident, while both were seated on the sidelines of a Logan High School football game. Saw each other across the goal line. It was instant chemistry. Now, my grandmother, who never referred to my father, Stanley Adkins, in that way, had an additional word that she used. Till the day my grandmother died, he was that Stanley Adkins. And that Stanley Adkins married that Pat Pack, and Mabel and Stanley Adkins, as a loving couple, behaved like the free spirits they were and lived a full life of daring adventure before I was ever around. With the aid of their parents, they built their first home together in the town of Monaville. They later moved to downtown Logan by the old planing mill and eventually settled in Stallings in the little house I grew up in. Now, these houses were specially modified. They had wheelchair ramps. The cabinets were lower. There was a carport. Now, why was there a carport? Carport was to help them gain time to get in and out of the car. Something you and I take for granted was a hard, arduous process because of that polio. So the carport kept them out of being drenched by the rain or out of the cold, blowing snow. What they didn't count on was having a son that would grow into a teenager of 6 foot 1 inches tall. So I spent my sophomore, junior, and senior year with a red welt on my head from banging into that carport every week. They both began careers. My dad became a watch repairman and clock repairman for the old Island Creek Company stores, something he could do with his hands. It didn't require him to be up on his feet. I always wished as a kid that he were as patient with me as he was with repairing those watches. My mom was asked by former Mayor Litz McGuire to become the City of Logan police clerk, and that's a position she held for nearly 30 years. Now, one of the things that amazed me is their vacationing. They vacation regularly together. Now, imagine this again. Put yourself in their place. 2 young adults in their 30s, both in wheelchairs, taking off into a world before ramps, before handicapped access. They visited state parks. They went through the Great Smoky Mountains. They visited the nation's capital, where my father said he thought he would never get off of the Beltway. But their favorite place to vacation was Daytona Beach, Florida. Now, back in the day, in the early 60s, before the interstate highway, it was 2 days for a couple of folks in wheelchairs to make it to Daytona Beach. So they would pack a cooler with sandwiches and head off, much to the chagrin of their parents in Monaville and Logan. Why Daytona Beach? Have any of you been to Daytona Beach? Because you can drive up to the ocean. They just wanted to live a life like everyone else. And they did. Guided by hope again, my mom decided she wanted the joys of motherhood. Now, our doctors back then, and you may remember Dr. Ray Kessel was our family doctor, told her in good faith, hey, look, that's not possible. Your husband's a paraplegic. You're in a wheelchair with polio. Can't be done. The older women here in Logan would scare her, saying that baby's going to be marked. He's going to have challenges. Well, certainly I did wind up with a few challenges, but I came out just fine in May of 1967. How many of you are parents? Parents in the room? I now have a 5-year-old at home. My wife and I fall into bed exhausted from chasing that kid around all day long. Imagine doing that from a wheelchair, changing diapers, cleaning up messes, and going to every school play, every ball game, while keeping a career as the police clerk of the City of Logan. I get tired thinking about it. I have no idea how they managed to do that, but my mom was guided by hope. Now, in the winter of her life, like most people, she wanted grandchildren. Like the good son I am, I made that tough. I waited to get married until my late 30s. But when I did get married, my wife and I practiced really, really hard for that grandchild. And in less than a year after being married, like a lot of newlyweds, we took care of business, and little Burke came along, and my mom was able to enjoy her grandson for a full year, which was a fantastic blessing. Doctors told her she'd never make it to see that grandchild, but she did, guided by hope. Pat Adkins was a dedicated wife, mother, and grandmother, but it didn't end there. She had a great love for family and friends. She had a great love for the state of West Virginia and for this town, the city of Logan, and her position as the City of Logan police clerk. As a teenager, I remember heading over to the police station to visit with her after school on the island. And my mom would show up for work no matter what the weather. And we heard an amazing story from one of the former police chiefs at my mom's funeral. He told Dave and I that one morning my mom showed up for work when there was about 4 inches of snow on the ground. Shortly thereafter, a city patrolman, who will remain nameless, called in and said, "You know, Chief, I don't think I can make it today. We got snow." And Chief said, "If Pat Adkins can make it to work today in her wheelchair, you get your ass in here right now." Patrolman showed up. She made it through several police chiefs, several mayoral administrations, both Democrat and Republican, and typed every warrant and every piece of correspondence in that office for 30 years. Filed thousands of parking tickets, let a few folks get out of them on occasion, and counseled many a young police officer on the finer points of small-town police work. One of the great stories that she told me when she came home was about a new patrolman named Sam. We'll leave Sam's name out because he is still a Logan resident. That last name will remain between us, but his initials are Doss. And Sam, in his excitement one day after a big day of policing, came in and took his revolver off and slapped it down on the counter right in front of my mom's desk, not realizing it was fully loaded, and a bullet whizzed right by her left ear. Mom kept her composure, called Chief Frazier in and said, "Chief, we need to treat Sam kind of like Barney Fife on the Andy Griffith Show. He gets one bullet, he keeps it in his shirt pocket, or I'm out of here." And that's how Sam remained a police officer with the city of Logan. Anybody who spent time in Pat's presence know what I mean when I say that when you were with Pat, you always felt like you were the most important person in the world. And today, as a young adult, I know that it was Pat's unity with God that allowed her to show sincere, unqualified love and devotion to her family and her friends, because she was guided by faith. My mom was faithful to her spiritual life and her religious beliefs. She always recognized the existence of God and the importance of the teachings of the Bible. As a child, she went to First Baptist Church of Logan, and as an adult was a faithful attendee of her friend Glenn White's Central Baptist Church. Now, that faith was put to the test in her last few years, and that's one of the things I want to talk to you about in terms of polio, because polio took my mom much younger than it should have. Those complications really began to test her. She was unable to get adequate exercise because she was confined to a wheelchair, so diabetes became an issue. She was diagnosed with something called post-polio syndrome, and her arms began too weak for a wheelchair. But she didn't quit. She said, "All right, we'll get an electric scooter." She motored around in that, and we just needed to stay out of the road. Mom's kidneys failed as a result of post-polio syndrome, so she was forced to endure the exhaustion and nausea of kidney dialysis 3 days a week. Yet she went on. Polio began to affect her equilibrium. She had several painful falls, but when you fall as someone whose legs don't work, you're helpless to get back up. Polio and its effects would shorten her quality of life. Her life itself, but never her will. She continued to display her tenacity and faith in a higher power. My cousin Beth Barrett told me that during her visits to see her Aunt Pat in the hospital that she seemed to be comforted most when Beth would read to her from the Bible. And I felt the same thing when I would pray with her by her bedside. One of her proudest moments is when I was humbled to be chosen as a deacon at First Baptist Church in Herndon, Virginia. And finally, guided by her faith, she would trust in God and surrender herself to God. And in the end, guided by her faith, she decided on her own to discontinue any treatments and tell me in no uncertain terms that she was ready to go be with my Father and with God. She pulled it together and made that decision on her own, which frankly, I don't think I would have been man enough to do. It's a pretty brave lady. And the flags here in Logan flew at half-staff that week. Hope, love, and faith. Now, Rotary International has spent a lot of time, a lot of effort eradicating polio worldwide. And if you're not aware of it, polio is still a major issue around the globe. I received a Facebook message last week from someone who had learned somehow, and I don't know how, that I would be here to speak with you today. His Facebook message was from a gentleman in Pakistan who said, you know, I'm thousands of miles away from you, but I want you to know this is a huge issue here in Pakistan, throughout Africa, the Middle East, and other third world countries. And folks, there's no reason for that. With the Salk vaccine and with the help of Bill and Melinda Gates and their charitable foundation, polio vaccines cost 60 cents a dose now. Just 60 cents to completely change someone's life so that they don't have to go through what Pat Adkins did. So today, I like to think of my mom up in heaven with God doing the one thing that she told me that she dreamed of, and that's dancing. Something as simple as dancing can be taken away by polio. So I want to thank the governor and thank Rotary International for your efforts on the behalf of folks like my mom to eradicate polio around the country. And I want to thank you for having me come back to these wonderful mountains to spend some time with you. Thank you.